Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today's episode is with a good friend of mine, Mayank Metha. He actually was born and grew up outside of the United States in South Africa, and he moved here a few years ago to focus on some business opportunities. So I thought he'd be a really great guest to really share some good insight on everything going on in the country now with race relations from somebody outside of the country's perspective, somebody that grew up outside of the U.S., somebody that grew up in South Africa, sharing his insight on what he thinks is going on, ways for improvement. We talk about that. We talk about what it was like to immigrate over here, immigrate legally, his thoughts on current immigration policies, as well as a little bit of business conversations and stuff like that. And just as a disclaimer as well, I do my best to have these conversations with people that I may or may not agree with on certain things. And when I talked with him about the racism topic, we've talked about a lot of things. We haven't talked too much about racism in particular, to be fully transparent. So his response wasn't, I didn't have an agenda. It wasn't, premeditated on my end. It was what, he truly believed. And we had what I thought was a really, really productive conversation on race-related topics as well as immigration-related. So I really enjoyed it. Like I've been saying every week, I feel like I learned something from these shows. I know you will enjoy it as well.
This is Openly Outspoken with Jeremy Adams, where differing opinions are not only accepted, they're encouraged.
We're live, man. Thanks for being on today.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I was super excited to have you on just because obviously you're a born outside of the United States, which
Sure.
A lot of people and everything that's going on in the politics and all the craziness going on, a lot of us are U.S. born citizens. So
Right.
I feel you can have a lot of good perspective on what's going on. Um,
Mhm.
can you share a little bit about where you were born and just kind of like your upbringing and stuff like that?
Absolutely. So, most of the time, most of my life, of course, like I've spent in South Africa. Parents moved there when I was a kid. Obviously lived there, worked there, went to university there. Um, After that, obviously, when I started working, I had the opportunity to travel to a wide range of countries, including Canada, Philippines, Indonesia, Dubai. Now in the US, in between, I was in Poland for a while, in Germany as well. And while, of course, living in all these parts of the world, these are the countries which I was living in. But then, of course, I had a chance to travel to multiple different neighboring countries and, reflect on how their cultures are different than ours and vice versa. And it was very, very interesting to kind of learn that how, despite being in the exact same part of the world and literally countries which share the same border, the cultures and the geographies and people and the lifestyles can change so significantly just in a period of few miles. So I think, and now obviously living in the USA, it's very different than anywhere else that I've had a chance to live. So just reflecting upon all of this and overall over the last 10 years since I've been working, since I've been traveling and everything else. So yeah, I think that's what kind of encompasses everything which we were speaking about the other day, and which I would like to talk about more. So yeah, that's about it.
So what was it like growing up in South Africa? And then for the listeners, Mayank actually lives in Orlando, not too far from me. So he lives in Florida now. But what was it like growing up in South Africa?
I mean, it's compared to the US, it's of course widely different than than anywhere else. Actually, I mean, much like any other third world country has its own challenges, has its own areas which much like how we have our own problems in the US. We've had our own share of issues over there, but I mean overall, I think it was good. It was interesting, of course. When you're growing up and you don't know anything, like, I mean, growing up, I didn't really have a chance to travel. I only got a chance to travel when I was like 20. So growing up, like, you don't really know what else exists outside of where you are. So you kind of tend to develop like a bit of a tunnel vision, which I think, like now looking back in hindsight, was like quite inaccurate of what you would assume it to be, because when growing up, like you kind of assume that, okay, everything around me is messed up, like everything needs to change, the people, the society, the geography, the politics, the surroundings, like the work ethics, the overall atmosphere in which we are being raised is terrible, and everything essentially requires a huge fundamental reform from the scratch. Then when you grow, and then when you kind of like start transcending to like transcending your boundaries and just like start traveling a little bit more, you kind of realize that actually it wasn't all that bad. It was every country is having like its own significant challenges to deal with. If you don't know any better, you would assume that, okay, leaving this country would probably be the best thing to do, and like moving to a first world country and all my problems will be history. But that's not how life works, essentially. I mean, you move to a new country, you realize, okay, well, now I have my own challenges. Now there is a whole different set of problems and like issues to deal with. And that's, I think, something which I was fortunate that at the age of 20 or 22, like I was fortunate to kind of have had the exposure to start traveling to a variety of different countries, like I was mentioning, and because of which you're able to gain a bit more of a 360-degree understanding of how the society works and the challenges which they have, where do they originate from, and how do they culminate to being where they are. And overall, I think that's what was a very eye-opening experience. And after that, every opportunity which I had to go back to my country, I mean, it was you start appreciating it a little bit more every single time.
Yeah.
Like you're like you know what? Like I took this for granted. I thought that this is something which was messed up, but actually, come to think of it, it's actually not. Now I miss this where I am, and those kinds of things. So I think that's something which kind of taught me a lot. And that's something which I'm still learning. I think it's a constant process. Like you'll never be in a space where even if you've traveled half of the world, or if you've visited like almost every single country on the planet, you'll never really be able to like to have that understanding. So it's a constant process. And again, fortunate to have been a part of the process at a rather early age. And I wish like more people get the chance to do so going forward. Yeah,
Traveling, and I agree, by the way. I've been to a lot of different countries. I plan to do much more traveling, but I've been to Cuba a couple times. I've been to Guatemala. I've been to Mexico. I've been to Ukraine. I've been to many really nice first world European countries too. But those trips really made me have even more appreciation for what we have in this country. I couldn't wait getting back from Cuba. I just like even little things. There weren't lines on the road like I was used to, so it's just this seems kind of chaotic without lines. Like how do cars just stay in straight, and just cars just were hitting each other in the streets and shit, and it's just normal. Here it's just there's a police report and stuff, and there it's just we just hit a car, like continue life. And I just was looking forward to a steaming hot shower. I was just so excited to take a hot shower that I'm used to. Just those are such little things that as Americans, and I can't speak for all Americans, but I can speak for myself. I've taken so many of those little things for granted that and those are just a few examples, right? I could probably come up with 1,000. It just really makes you appreciate what we have here in the United States, even low income people in the United States. Not that we can't always look to improve, of course, but we have a lot to be grateful for. So what are some contrasts that if you can see being in the States now? That's what people call it in South Africa, right?
Sure.
The States.
Right. I think everywhere outside
of the United States, called the States. Yeah. So what do you see some big contrast from growing up in South Africa and growing up here?
I think okay, so quite a few. I mean, and they are like different worlds altogether. I'll just like for the I mean just for the sake of diversity, I'll include a few more countries, few more third world countries where I've had the chance to live, and then compare them like exclusively to the US, for example. Um,
Real quick too, would you classify South Africa as third world or
um, I would say so. However, it's compared to all the rest of the countries. And again, this was what I was saying. Like, I mean, you growing up there because you don't know any better, you assume that okay, this is how third world looks like. You travel to further third world countries, and I'm talking about like Southeast Asia and absolute, like for example, even South America, and you realize, actually, now that I think of it. South Africa would be more somewhere between a little bit better than what a traditional third world country would kind of seem like. But yes, I mean, from the economics perspective, from I think in general, just talking about from the life quality perspective, it would still classify as a third world country. Yes. Now that said, comparing the US to any of the other countries, I think you mentioned, you brought up a point where, like, for example, there are no lines on the road. There were no, for example, if you get into a fender bender with someone, like life just keeps moving on. You don't have to call the cops whatsoever. Absolutely. And now I'll compare, like, for example, in South Africa, tap water is drinking water, right? I mean, essentially. And in fact, like in the whole of African continent, it's one of the purest drinking waters you can get. So, I mean, and again, growing up, you kind of take that for granted. Now you move to Philippines. I moved to Philippines. I moved to Indonesia. And guess what? You can no longer drink tap water because it's absolutely unportable. So you have to kind of resort to getting either, those mineral water supplies or tie up with those gallon jars or something like that. And that was one of the first cultural shocks for me because I was like, okay, well, I've just been so used to kind of drinking tap water, and then now that's not the case. So again, one of the very, very simple things which you kind of just take for granted throughout. You do not realize that in certain countries this might be a luxury. So when you get back, you start appreciating it a little bit more. Again, also simple little things like, okay, well, it is obviously end of the day, the safety and crime, crime is a huge concern, and hence of course, roadside safety, especially you can get carjacked on the road. It's a common scenario. You can get mugged in the streets. I mean, so you should be a little careful of your surroundings. I mean, in fact, one of the a couple of for example, one of the things which still kind of is something which I'm still kind of get surprised by, is how safe overall you feel walking on the streets of Orlando, regardless of whatever day or time. Of course, I mean, obviously, I'm not talking about areas which you shouldn't be wandering into. But I mean, in general, walking on the streets of downtown Orlando, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, it's been okay. It's been fine. You always have the sense of safety, not even for a second. I mean, at least since I've been here, I've never felt, and of course I can't speak for anyone else. And I mean, so it's more like I've never felt unsafe. I've never felt that I'm in some immediate threat or danger. Now comparing this to the streets of Johannesburg, even in broad daylight, you have to constantly watch over your shoulder if you're walking, right? Until you reach your car, you have to make sure you don't park your car in an alien spot or in an alienated, in a whole different spot. You have to make sure that you are constantly your doors are locked, your windows are rolled up when you're pulling over at a red light. If it's a red light, if it's too late in the night, and if you pull at a red light and there's no cars around, it is recommended that you do not stop. Just watch your surroundings and just continue driving, even if it's a red light. I mean, just because you never know what can go wrong where, and it doesn't take too long for that to happen. And it's obviously it's not the most ideal scenario. We wish it was a much safer place to live, to kind of do justice to the beauty which the country brings with it. But at the same time, it's more so because of the fact so that's one of the things which kind of surprises me over here. Another and there are numerous versions of it. For example, recently we have been looking for houses to view. We are moving to a new house, and I would apply for a house viewing or just say, a house tour, and I'll just get an SMS on my phone saying, "Hey, when you reach the house, this is the code to the logbox. It's a self viewing arrangement." That completely. I mean, that was a huge cultural shock for me when I moved there, because this was unheard of in every other country I've lived in. Um, Predominantly because of safety reasons. I mean, no one would let you just enter a house, even if it's an empty, vacant house, just because, I mean, you never know. And so that's something which kind of but then now I realize, again, um, much like how there are things which we take there for granted, it's also the other way around. Like, how many things can be so much better over there compared to what we have over here? I mean, just learning from here and take them back there. And I mean, I think the overall structure of how safe people feel over here, how people are well aware of their rights over here, and all of those things. I think they start from education and just all of those things. If we have them back there, we probably won't have as many issues as we do. But I mean, obviously that's a constant process. But at the same time, it needs to start from somewhere. So I feel like this could be a good starting point there, just by educating people on what rights they have, while also educating them, hey, if you don't feel safe, these are your options, and then educating them on all. Because I mean, most people don't even realize what options do they have in case of a confrontation, in case of self-defense situation, or all of those things. So just overall educating them, people, overall just educating people over there and bringing them up to speed with what kind of changes they can make. Overall giving them a feeling of safety and everything, which are some of the potential key lessons which I think they can learn from here, among multiple other ones. But yeah.
Yeah, and from what I know about South Africa, which is very
Mm,
minimal, I agree with what you're saying. I feel that there's America, there's some peer nations in Western Europe, there's Japan, there's South Korea. There's a handful of peer top nation democracies, Canada, right?
right.
But outside of that, it's just there's some major challenges in these countries. And again, not that America is perfect. We're not. I mean, we're going through a lot of
So
shit right now as a country, and there's always room for improvement. But I still feel that you can say two things. You can say, hey, we live in a great country. We're very fortunate to be here. We have a lot of great things in this country. At the same time, we still have a bit to go. We still need to improve these areas. And I feel, for me, at least from a self love standpoint, I can't be like, I fucking hate myself. I need to improve. It's like, hey, I'm a great person. I also need to, get better at sharing my feelings or whatever it is, right? It's just, I think we can say
right.
both. So what do you think about all the the racism and social justice conversation going on in the country today? And then, just out of curiosity, have you ever experienced have you ever experienced racism outside of the U.S., and have you experienced it in the U.S.? Just out of curiosity.
Okay, so um, I mean, I don't know if that makes me a little bit on the fortunate side or what, but no, I have never really experienced racism in the US. None that I'm aware of course. I mean, of course, if there was a hidden message behind it, I just failed to read it, of course, uh, whatsoever. But no, I have never really experienced any form of racism since I've been here. In fact, on the contrary, I've actually felt very welcomed. Very, I feel like, you know, obviously, so when you're outside of the US and when you're watching all the news, and of course, how, the media, the international media, and overall all the the major journalism, publications and whatsoever, they always cover the US because the US kind of dictates the world's economy. So you tend to hear a lot about it, and you tend to read a lot about it, and you just growing up outside, you kind of realize okay, well, how much scope of opportunities and how much how many opportunities overall prevail in the country. And it works the exact opposite way as well, because when the US is going through some some down some bad times, the media would cover that so extensively that being outside of the country, you'd feel like everything is going wrong over there, which is, I mean, okay, had I not been here, I'd have probably assumed the same thing because I mean, I get texts and calls from my friends asking how am I doing because I mean, what they've been hearing are not like too many good things, and I reassure them. I'm like, no, actually, it's not all that bad. I mean, I understand like where the standpoint is coming from, but at the same time, there's so much to cherish, and it's not like everything has been drastically bad or whatsoever. Now, talking of racism outside of the US, actually, funnily enough, I have been like I have felt discriminated towards like outside of the US in a few different countries. But it's not been something which has kind of affected me like to an extent or to like to the point where um, I've I've kind of generalized or just judged an entire country, city, or a population like on the basis of just by like taking a sample of say a few misfits or a few people who probably like don't really have their vision aligned with the rest of the society, because they are bad apples everywhere. Or I mean, like for that matter, like there you will find like a wide bunch of people with contrasting views, some of them not so like popular views, or for example whatsoever, like some of them very much contrary to what the modern society believes in, and that happens in every single country. I mean, again, comparing it to South Africa, for example, the whole abolition of apartheid as a movement is a very young, like is a very young process. I mean, when Nelson Mandela was released from the prison, and then the whole system of apartheid and racial discrimination came to an end, it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was in 1994 or 1993, and then it's still a very young movement. So I mean, like imagine people who have always lived believing, like in the pre-apartheid era, believing that this is the only truth which they know. And now suddenly, like, when they are, say, at whatever age, like, they might be at, and now suddenly, like, there's this new generation of leaders and there's this new reforms, obviously for the betterment and equality for everyone. But it could be a little bit like, it could be a little bit challenging for them to change their views at that age or at that stage, although it might sound very obvious to you and me,
Yeah.
but it's not really like, I mean, they've lived and grown up in a whole different time. So, I mean, do you really blame them for that? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, the way I look at them, like, I mean, hey, if they failed to keep up with how the society was progressing, I mean, it's somewhere, I mean, it's okay, well, maybe you could blame them, but I mean, you can't blame them entirely, because as a country, we fostered that behavior for a very long time than what we should have in the first place. I mean, so it's also like, partially our fault. So, I mean, you can just kind of take it and just go from there. So no, I mean, I'd say it again, like, I don't really let these things, or like, these behaviors from a handful of people affect my mentality or change my opinion about a society. No, I mean, that's just a part of what we live in. So
Yeah, and I think it's important to make clear the two cities you've lived in are Chicago and Orlando, if I'm not mistaken, right?
mostly Orlando, Chicago, just like for work most of the
Got
times.
it.
But I mean, just been like, yeah, I do visit Chicago frequently.
So two rather progressive cities. So I feel that's what I talked to LaShawn about on one of my first episodes was, and he loves Orlando. LaShawn's a black American living in Orlando as well, and he's just like, Orlando's been great, right? Orlando's
Yeah,
people that don't live here, it's really hard to explain, but it's an extremely open and accepting town. I feel I just
absolutely.
of all we have a huge LGBTQ community, like just like everybody's just whatever, like I don't, if you're happy, I'm happy, and everybody seems to be pretty friendly here. So obviously you
Right.
haven't lived in rural Alabama or anything like that, which things may be different for you there. uh
Sure.
my whole thing, and just what's going on lately, and it's, listen, I don't want to ever pretend like I'll know exactly what it's like to be a black or Hispanic person
Sure.
living in this country. I don't. But what I have learned a lot about is leadership and efficiency. And when I see, and I posted this on my Facebook the other day, and it got me some people removing me off my friends list, and a lot of people got really worked up about it. I was like, what is the NBA boycotting games doing? Because
I saw that. Yeah.
first of all, the NBA is predominantly black, which is, by the way, I'm 100% fine with. The superior athletes, whoever those are, should be in the league, and it just happens to be predominantly black. The fan base out of the major sports is overwhelmingly predominantly black fan base, and the most frustrating thing. So when the NBA suffers, which their ratings have been in bad shape, as far as I know, they've been trending downward the last few years. A lot of that, there's a lot of reasons potentially for that, but one of the big reasons is potentially the same reason as ESPN's been declining in ratings, which is being a political organization. When you have
Yep.
really smart guys and influential guys like LeBron James just saying, I can't walk in the street and I feel like I'm going to get shot as a black man. The data doesn't support that. And saying stuff like that, and just saying also the whole mission of the boycotts is we want racial justice, which I think just about all of Americans, vast majority, okay, with 90% plus, 95% plus, can agree on we want equality, right? But when there's no clear goal, and there,
Right.
how do we know we're even making progress? It's just like equality. It's like, what does that even mean? And this is what I've been saying, and what I was saying in the comments. People are like, it's bringing awareness, and I was like, that's the fucking stupidest thing. It's bringing awareness. Like, we both operate businesses. Do we want awareness, or do we want clients? Like, do we want people signing contracts? Like, we can go out of business just having awareness. Like, awareness is great, I guess, but if awareness is the goal, what exactly is that doing? So rather than LeBron saying stuff like that, it's LeBron should say, hey, this is what our goal is. Let's work to reform this policy. LeBron should meet with, he's in LA, set up meetings with Gavin Newsom, set up meetings with LAPD, set up meetings with Donald Trump and talk about this stuff. Like, actually do things that are going to talk about specific police reform. Even like, I'm very libertarian, so I'm small government all the way around.
Sure.
Absolutely not do I want cops having too much power and protected from hurting anybody. Libertarians and conservatives could get behind, hey, let's remove these immunity laws in place for police, so if they do something stupid, they're held liable. Like, there's specific policies and changes that really smart large organizations like the NBA, billions and billions of dollars of uh, like company size, unlimited legal resources, they could say all these specific targets and specific goals that I believe almost all of America could get behind. But instead, it's just, I feel like it's just stirring the pot even more by saying, like, hey, we're just going to boycott this for equality with no clear goal. I will say the recent um, report came out that there's going to be coalitions created where the players meet with the governors and things like that. But I mean, that's just my opinion. It's like, hey, if LeBron was like, we need to start meeting with you know, the cops in every city. Every major team needs to have an initiative. In Orlando, they need to be meeting with OPD and meeting with the mayor and meeting with the Governor DeSantis, and fuck it, meet Trump. I know you guys don't like each other, but how are we going to make change with anything if we're not willing to have conversations with those that maybe don't understand? Like, even Donald Trump, I like, probably is not for police having so much power where they can just kill somebody and get away with it. Like, I would bet that that's not the case, and I would bet 99% of Americans support that. So I've been, I feel like the heart is in the right place, but
Sure.
the heart in the right place doesn't really do much in a world that, like, we need to take action. And I know I just went on a little bit of a rant there, but
That's fine. Yeah.
I'm curious, your thoughts on that.
So to be honest with you, I mean, I mean, to be honest with you, like, firstly, I haven't really followed NBA that much, but I did start reading up about it, like, obviously, a little bit more, like, when I arrived here. Now, that said, I agree with you on strongly. I agree strongly on the fact that yes, people with opposing viewpoints, instead of tweeting about each other or instead of talking about each other, should rather talk to each other, um, to either A, resolve differences, or B, to reach a common ground where they can like agree to like, work something forward. Because without that, I mean, you're just like constantly in this game of like, just talking crap about each other and just like, not that's not really leading to any kind of a solution in anytime soon. Now, that said, and if I would appreciate like, if you could fill me in on this a little bit. When NBA players decide to boycott a game, um, I'm assuming, and this is just like, just assuming from just like a blanket rule which follows like every sport in the world. What happens is two kinds of there are two major kind of repercussions, which two major like groups which get affected by this. Number one, the sponsors, and I'm not sure who the sponsors are for, like, let's say for this whole NBA tournament whatsoever, but let's say, just for argument's sake, if it's say Nike, Adidas, or any of those bigger brands, do they then kind of realize that, hey, if this continues going forward, like, uh, we will essentially be losing our clients and we'll be losing like, money in this. And in that case, maybe they are persuaded to take a stronger stance against all of these things. And I would assume that the second group, which of course would get affected majorly, would be the fans, right? I mean, the fans who were anticipating this game would kind of realize. Now, again, I'm not talking about fans like, who are smart, who are mature enough to understand what's going on. I'm talking about like, the, like, say, for example, kids or the teenagers who are, I'm not to say that they aren't smart or anything, but I mean, like, just in case, like, the kids and the teenagers who are looking forward to say LeBron James come on the court and play or whatsoever, when they realize that, okay, this is being cancelled, kind of has a stronger impact on them. And then maybe they tend to realize the gravity of the situation a little bit more. And I think, I mean, this is just, again, purely from my standpoint, that if at an age of, say, if when I was 14 and I was rooting for my favorite rugby team or my favorite, basketball team or whatsoever, and then I realized last minute that the game was cancelled because of everything which has been going on, number one, I'd be a little like, heartbroken about it because I was looking forward to a bigger game. And then secondly, I'll be like, I would kind of personally just like, look or dive a little bit more into the cause, what led to all of this. And I think that educating, like, obviously using the fact that, hey, something which I was looking forward to didn't end up taking place. And now as a teenager, as like someone in his early teens, if I could start educating myself on this a little bit more, regardless of my ethnicity, background, race, religion, whatsoever, I'll just, maybe that'll kind of act as a driving factor for me to like, start paying a little more attention, or just like, start taking a little more concern towards these things. And that eventually could maybe lead to like a better society, right? I mean, like, hey, if at a rather young age, if I'm like, researching about these things instead of just topics which resonate or concern me, and if I'm taking interest in like, what's going on in the society, how can we make it better? That should kind of, I mean, maybe it's a very long shot, but maybe that
Yeah.
could help, like,
I mean,
yeah,
you're bringing up good points, and the word you said, which is a very important word, 7 times I think, was maybe. Like, maybe
yeah,
those could do all those things, or maybe we
yeah,
can fucking take guaranteed action that I know for 100% fact will make change. Like that. That's what a lot of the comments, and that's what a lot of people say. Oh, it's bringing awareness. It's increasing conversation. It's like, dude, LeBron, the NBA, pretty much any NBA player could set up a meeting with anybody they wanted to in the country. Okay? Like
right,
that, yes, maybe all those things could happen, maybe not. I mean, and also I doubt there's a bunch of racists watching NBA games and that really care that
sure,
much if it's being
yeah,
boycotted anyway. You know what I mean? Like what what the NBA being boycotted does, in my opinion, is it just, there's the casual fan, which there's a lot, and again, you don't have to take my word for it. The NBA's salary cap next year, and this was actually before COVID, okay? This was announced earlier this year, I believe. Their salary cap, which is the approved team spending budget, is actually going down for next season, which means revenues and or profits are down for the company. Like, that means the company isn't doing as well financially. And again, that's before COVID. So obviously something's going on within an organization that's causing the revenues to decline. And maybe it's just correcting. Maybe it has nothing to do with the political stuff. Maybe it's just they were overinflated and now they're just correcting a little bit. Who knows? But it is very peculiar timing that the last few years they've, become a big time political activist group, which again, by the way, that's the great thing about this country. Anybody can do whatever they want to do. So if it's important for the NBA to be a political activist group, and they have every right to do that as a business. With that being said, they just have to know there could be benefits and there could be consequences. I believe Nike going all in with Colin Kaepernick ended up being a benefit for that brand. That was a big risk, but that ended up working out well for Nike as far as I know. But there's just you're going to potentially alienate a lot of fans. But yeah, that's all I guess that frustrates me, and it's not just the NBA boycotting, because again, they're their own company. Whatever makes them happy, it's their right as an American. But it's also even a lot of protests and things like that. There's not a clear goal that I see. It's like specific police reforms, conversations with people. Like I feel that's what's going to make actual change. Just yelling at old racist people mostly, which I agree. I know there's young racist people too, but I'm very strong believing that most are much older than you and me, which we were both born in 1990, by the way. Yelling at them about it and telling them that they're racist pieces of shit or whatever, like, that's not going to make them less racist. I would imagine that would just keep their view the same, if not make them more racist. So that's all. It's just like, hey, like, I want to see stuff done too, but I also don't want the country to be divided just for the sake of being divided, within nothing really after months of protests and boycott. What boycotts, what like specific changes have been made that it's gonna, maybe a few here and there. The LAPD moves some, funding from the police to community organizations. I mean, there's a same thing with the NYPD. I mean, there's a few things here and there. If you looked at as big change, maybe this is a success. But what awareness doesn't do, if another George Floyd case happens, what the fuck does awareness do to that? If there's there's no policy change, and that's all. And guys like LeBron, and I keep just picking on LeBron, but he's the biggest name of the NBA, so that's why I'm doing it. He could influence policy change. Like, LeBron just by himself could influence a policy change that would really, really help move forward, like, in a positive way, in my opinion.
So on that note, and I'm just going to just to kind of piggyback of what you were saying and take it to to a little bit of a different tangent maybe. So one thing which I'm kind of again, and this is more from, say, an outsider's perspective, is this. I mean, look, as far as racism goes, and like how I was saying, I have been fortunate that I haven't really felt treated any differently in the US, but I have felt like some kind of a discrimination or some kind of a mistreatment in a few other countries. So just on the basis of that, I feel like overall this problem of racism, it's kind of worldwide. It goes way beyond what the US is going through. If it's existing in continents like Africa, it's pretty much existing everywhere else as well, right? And one of the things to kind of consider is this. I mean, every other country has so many problems which take a bigger priority, as opposed to as opposed to racism. It might sound completely absurd, but I mean, like, there are countries where the government's prime focus is just to make sure that their citizens can afford a meal every day, right?
Yeah.
Not even talking about like 3 or 4 meals, just one meal every day. And obviously, there are countries where, especially right now, okay, well, I'm not even talking about this right now, like with COVID and everything, even prior to COVID, there have been countries, and this I'm talking about like 4 years ago, like right in Southeast Asia, there have been countries, and we worked with multiple like small NGOs and like organizations to help feed people and whatsoever, and it's always been way more challenging over there to kind of, number one, cater to like for those countries and their leaders to just make sure that their population and their people are able to afford meals, be able to get a job. The unemployment rates in those countries are significantly higher, and the below poverty, the people who live below a certain poverty line, which every country has its own definition of, are way more as opposed to what they are in the US and whatsoever. So now the thing is, however, this doesn't mean that the problem of like discrimination on the basis of color of your skin is something which is which doesn't which is not that big of a deal. It's still that big of a deal. It's just a problem that the other problems kind of tend to overshadow that problem. And so, I mean, imagine the kind of problems which those countries have to face. Now, again, like how we were saying, like people look up to the US to kind of take charge in certain things. So even a small gesture like this, like for example, maybe who knows what the grand scheme of plan for the NBA players is. Maybe this was like a first step towards something big, or maybe they are yet to come up with a plan or whatsoever. But I think we'll see how that unfolds. But I mean, overall, I feel like this kind of did send a message to quite a few other countries, because I was like reading my friends' posts and tweets from different parts of the world. And it did send a loud message to them as well that, oh, okay, so this is actually a bigger problem. And this kind of, they use this as like something like, hey, if this is what's going on, why don't our countries pay more attention towards this problem? I understand that we have big problems to deal with, but this is really big. So I think maybe there's like, something which, again, I'm not 100% sure what the stats in those countries are right now and what changes have been since this has happened. But I feel like there can be something which can come out of this if obviously done properly, if done in an organized manner, if there is a plan to follow up after the first step. So we'll see. But
yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, I'm not, of course, awareness, there's no downside to awareness, right?
Sure.
If we can bring awareness, I don't think there's a horrible thing to that or horrible like upside. It's just when I feel like we're very divided right now as a country. There's just a lot of tension, and with all that tension and with all this frustration, and it's just I'm hopeful we come out of this with positive specific change. And what I see right now is just a lot of tension without a bunch of specific action taking place. And I guess like what's the point of going through all this if there's not going to be specific goals, outcomes? How do white people know, like me, know we've succeeded? How do I know I can help? Just bring more awareness. Like that's kind of what the verdict is. Talk about it, which we are. So in that case, we are talking about it. But it's just like there would be so much more progress made, I think, with the the most influential athletes and Black Americans. I mean, meet with these police departments, talk about these things. And I know I saw some tweet where some head of a police department challenged LeBron James to handcuff somebody that was resisting arrest. I think there's the other point of view too. We need to look at, like, I agree, cops need much better training. I think that's a very clear outcome from all this, is we should invest more in training of police. They're vastly undertrained. A lot of them aren't in the greatest health. That's probably not the best for people that we're trying to avoid lethal force. So that's all. It's just like, yeah, I guess awareness is good, and if good things are happening from it, great. But Why not use
Right.
this opportunity to rewrite law, specific policy change? And maybe some stuff will happen. Maybe, I know Rand Paul, who actually got attacked after the RNC, was actually, out of all the people, this is the craziest thing to me too, the Democrats who are just for equality and blah, blah, blah. It was a Republican, Rand Paul, that created the act for Breonna Taylor. Like, that's what's crazy in all this, is it's just like there's a party that claims to be for all this movement, and then a Republican actually is, pushing the bill. So another thing, and I'm curious to your thoughts, that I feel is a big area for growth regarding racism is not every. Okay, so is every death from a white person to a black person, is that automatically racism? Like, can we not investigate the stats? Like, is every time a white cop kills a black guy for whatever reason for the rest of time, is that just going to be racist motivation? Or can we say, hey, maybe it was racism, maybe it wasn't, maybe he's just a fucking asshole, maybe it was justified? I mean, there's a lot more to it, and we're a very intelligent human species to like look into things more details. I feel like a
Right.
big opportunity for growth is looking at cases and saying, hey, maybe it was race motivated, but also maybe it wasn't. Maybe he's just a fucking asshole that was undertrained and was scared and was losing sleep, and he shot somebody too, and it had nothing to do with the fact that the person was of a different color. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Just I feel like that's a big step for us. It's just looking at facts, looking at evidence, and investigating
Right.
what's going on instead of just blaming everything on race before we have any evidence.
Sure. I'm actually glad you brought this up because I literally the other day, not too long ago, I was having the same conversation with a friend of mine from Johannesburg, and he raised a point, and I mean, I'll also like share the things which he was sharing with me, because we were literally having like a Zoom call, and he shared a screen, and he was showing me all, and it was also a bit of a surprise for me because I never looked at it from that standpoint, and it was this. So every time there's like you were saying, perhaps a racially motivated, like killing of a human being, or like police assault or whatsoever, be it racially motivated or not, or whatsoever the case might be, if you look at the headlines, and I'm just talking about like the way the national US media kind of like puts it forward, they'll always include the race or the color of the skin in the headline, like white cop shoots black unarmed man whatsoever. Obviously it kind of like what this does, this kind of like in your head subconsciously they are planting the seeds that, okay, this was a racially motivated attack. And on the other hand, if you look at, say, the headlines, if this exact same thing were to happen in South Africa, they don't really include the names of people, or so sorry, they don't really include the color of the skin or the ethnicity of the person anywhere in the headlines. They just say, a cop murders an unarmed man, and that's about it. So the thing is, like, you're not really wired to think of it from a racial standpoint, unless, of course, the news channel or the publication has a malicious agenda behind it. I mean, so you could just be going on with your day like, oh, look at this, another case of police brutality, without even relating it to racism. And so, again, to your point, yes, I'm sure there have been cases here which have been racially motivated. For me, it's tough to tell which ones were and which ones weren't. And then, of course, there have been cases which were probably not racially motivated, which was just basically because of the inefficiency or, the lack of training for which a cop may or may not have received. So it's very difficult to say, but I feel like, the way media, and then to top it off, social media kind of like, filters that information and then feeds it to you, it has a lot to do with how you perceive it. Like, you could be, one of the most like, educated people with a very high comprehension, right? I mean, you could make your own like, decision on whether this was an attack which was driven by any like, malicious agendas or not. But then when you see, you know how they say, like, if you repeat the same lie 20 times, it becomes a truth. I'm not saying this is a lie, but if you kind of fundamentally just twist a piece of information to suit your vendetta or to suit your propaganda, and then keep feeding it to the society, eventually 8 out of 10 people will start believing you. And I think that's what happens a lot over here, what I've seen, as opposed to a few other countries. Now, I mean, this, to your point, it could be, or it could be driven because of something which was racial. But it could be because of a racial intention. It could not have been because of that at all. But end of the day, I feel like it's controlled by people who are delivering this information, as opposed to them providing you with all the facts and figures and letting you decide for yourself. And I think this was a conversation which you and I were having the other day, that how the media is also divided in, like, what political group they are supporting or they are a part of. And that, of course, controls the narrative behind what they want to feed you, which I think happens to a degree, to an extent, in every other country in the world. But I think recently I've seen it happen a lot more over here as opposed to any of the other countries, which kind of is was also a bit of a shock. But I think it's that's basically where your judgment comes in. So I feel like, end of the day, we need to kind of, like, filter all the propagandas and the narratives out, and just see information for what it is, and, like, check the facts, check the figures, check the stats, and then reach our own conclusion. Now, the problem with that, which is what kind of, like, which is where I like one of the quotes which you shared on Facebook, which I absolutely loved, was that the whole motto of 2020 seems to be, if you don't agree with me, you're a part of the problem. And I feel like no matter how sensible of an individual I might be, and if I look at the facts and figures and I go, like, you know what, this doesn't seem like it was racially motivated, everyone who's on the other side will kind of, like, blame me as a problem, will kind of just be like, okay, you don't really see it this way, that's because you are a part of the problem. And I'm like, no, well, actually, I'm just studying the facts and figures. So I feel like it's that constant disagreement between the groups who have opposing viewpoints, and them not being able to reach a logical, reasonable conclusion is a bigger problem than how the media is kind of narrating it. Because, I mean, technically the media will not be able to manipulate if people with different viewpoints were able to agree on, like, something which was logical and rational. So that's what my take on that is. I know it's a bit different, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, CNN, I saw an article recently, they've had the highest TV ratings this year than they've had since something like the 1980s. So why would
Okay.
CNN want any of this to stop? I mean, why? I'm surprised CNN hasn't turned and been pro-Trump at this point, because that Trump, between COVID, riot coverage, and the election, that's been amazing for their business. I mean, CNN is a company. They're not government owned. They can do whatever they want. Same thing with
Right.
Fox. Same thing with any news publication. But what from there, as a company that has shareholders, that has bills to pay, that has executives that want to earn as much as possible,
Hmm.
which we're typically for, as you and me are
Sure.
both entrepreneurial and capitalist. Like, the more they benefit, it's almost like the more society doesn't benefit. It's just,
Absolutely. Yeah.
like these TV ratings. So I guess that's where maybe the pendulum will swing, and more conversations like this is, obviously, I started this podcast, not that I have like huge influence or something. I think the podcast can continually grow and reach a lot of people eventually. But if more people started things like this, where there's long form conversations, you have people on that you disagree with, you're not necessarily trying to just push a narrative the whole time. I think that's a reason why podcasts are getting so popular, and that's why Rogan's show is so big. Like, Rogan, he calls himself a Democrat. I mean, I really think he's just like a moderate Republican at this point after listening to him, and he just moved to Texas. So, but he has people further right, further left, and they just talk about things. And, like, even Bernie, if you watch Fox News, Bernie is this crazy fucking socialist. They'll just clip things and, like, you don't have the best opinion of Bernie Sanders. But on his interview with Joe Rogan, I gained a new respect for Bernie Sanders. I was like, I actually kind of agree with him on some of these things. He seems like a
Sure.
good guy. He's passionate about what he does. I truly got the feeling he wants to
Right.
help America, you know, and we solve that through conversations, and hopefully the market will take advantage of this opportunity with more things like this to shift our focus off of news, which is just very narrative driven and
Sure.
biased. And it when if you're not having conversation with people you don't agree with, like what are we even accomplishing? Like you and me can just talk about how great capitalism is and all day, right? And how
Sure.
business has been great for us. But if we don't talk to people that business hasn't been great for, we're never going to learn or grow. We're just going to be ranting about how great it is for us, you know?
No, absolutely. And just on that note, right? So, I mean, and how we were talking about um, what's remarkably different about the US as a society, as as a country, and overall as an economy, and compared to the rest of the countries, and much like how everything has its has two sides to it. So, I mean, I'll tell you like the top three things which I've seen, for example, which are widely different. And I think I personally have a huge amount of appreciation of for these three things about how the US has done it. Number one, the freedom of expression, right? I mean, like how you were just saying, people here are aware of their rights. They are educated enough to understand that they have the freedom of expression, and they feel free to express themselves, which is not something you'd see in most of the rest of the world, right? I
Yeah.
mean, expression is limited to your close friends and family, or your your acquaintances, whatever. But not too many people over there are and but by not too many, I mean like a major population is not really able to. They don't realize what resources they have at their disposal and how to use them, which of course comes from lack of awareness, and how to utilize them to to achieve absolutely anything. Over here, I've seen people use freedom of expression not just verbally on social media, but also take a stand to kind of promote their viewpoint and express themselves, which I think is a sign of a very progressive society. Now, second, and this is more on the personal life side of things, I've seen people in the US, compared to the rest of the world, are way less afraid to restart at any point of time, which I think is great. And by that, like what I mean on the personal side, I mean, I'm not talking about if you fail at your business and then you restart again. That happens pretty much across the globe. I'm talking about more from the standpoint of, let's say a relationship you were in didn't work out, or if you were married for a long enough time and then, because of whatsoever reason, the marriage falls off and you separate from your partner, people are not scared of restarting because there is no social stigma associated to it. Now, I'm talking about a few third world countries where, if I've seen people who are just way too scared to restart, to give their life a second shot after being married to someone for 20 years of their lives, if due to whatsoever reason the marriages don't work, they don't even bother looking for a partner the second time, just because they feel it's a socially unacceptable thing to do. Which again translates to the first point, which is that they don't have the freedom of expression over there, despite it's not a government thing. I mean, it could be, they could be living in a very democratic country, but I mean, it's just a social thing. And the last thing is the government aid. Like in the US, for example, the way, there is a lot of which the government does for its people. And believe it or not, I mean, compared to the rest of the countries, there is a lot which the government here does for its people. I mean, simple, for example, during COVID, whatever the paycheck protection program they were offering, the stimulus checks which went out, not too many countries you'd see this happening. Obviously, number one, because the US can afford it, but they could afford it because over the last whatever amount of duration, they have been able to build their economy to a point where the government can fund and take care of its citizens. Now, there's a flip side to each and every of these three aspects, right? And which is what you see over here. I mean, the first one, when you see freedom of expression, now what's the flip side of that? I mean, the other countries would love to have it. But now you see, for example, here people have freedom of expression, But then, just like how we were saying, if your way of expressing yourself or if your viewpoint is different than mine, we are immediately like hostile towards each other.
Yeah.
So, right, so that's the first thing. When you're scared, when people here have the option of restarting, they feel they can restart at any point of time. But that's also why they take certain things for granted, right? Because they're like, okay, like, what happens if this fails? I can restart it at any point of time, which does not happen as much as in the rest of the countries. Now, I'm not too familiar with what the divorce rates are or what the, like the whole marriage counseling rates are over here compared to the rest of the world. But I mean, I'm sure if you look it up, you'll see a trend in there. And then the next thing is like the government, which kind of fosters the behavior. Hey, no matter what the government does, it's never enough, right? Because like I was saying, when you have only, say, for example, seen one government in action, when you only lived in one particular place, you tend to develop a tunnel vision that, okay, well, what's $1,200 going to do for me? Now, I'll tell you, like, if I know quite a few countries where if the government was able to provide half of that to its citizens, they'd be thanking them for the rest of their lives. I mean, that's how big of a difference it would make there. Now, so to your point, I mean, because everything has a flip side to it, and when you get too used to something, you start poking holes in them, and then you realize, okay, well, nothing is actually good enough. Now, the same kind of concept applies in everything, right? So, I mean, be it, for example, how the government is dealing with COVID, how the government is dealing with, these social inequalities or whatsoever the case might be. So, I mean, we'll always, obviously, the idea is not to appreciate everything and just like forget about prospering or progressing and fixing what's bad. But at the same time, I think there can be a harmony between what we are receiving and where we are yet to go. There should be a positive mindset towards that, right? I mean, okay, well, whatever we are getting, it's good. It's not. If we want to make it better, we all have to work towards it together, and only then we can start seeing some kind of a progress whatsoever. So yeah.
Yeah, and that gratitude right there is, I mean, I know Brene Brown talks about it for any Brene Brown listeners, but she talks about gratitude. Practicing gratitude is one of the most important things to happiness. It's just like, hey,
Yep.
we have a lot of things to be grateful for. I mean, how crazy is it that you and me were born in 1990 and we're living in 2020? We could have easily been born in like the year 300 and we probably wouldn't
Yeah.
have even lived to this age. We just would
Absolutely.
have
Yeah.
maybe starved or just been killed in war, or
Yeah.
who knows, right? But or been,
Yeah.
or like that we're grateful to just be born in this time, and we can still always improve. And I think it's crazy that the founding fathers of our country in the late 1700s knew the importance of freedom of speech, right? Like that's
Yeah.
not a new law for this country, because they left like England, which didn't have that freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And I think
Right.
that's the only chance our country has long term, because that's not going anywhere. I think we'd have a legitimate civil war if there was ever an infringement on our First Amendment of freedom of speech, freedom of religion. That will never go away as long as the
Sure.
United States of America is around. We have
Mhm.
to be able to look at people and say, your view, although different than mine, I accept it because it's your American right. And I know that's very difficult, and that's for our
Right.
egos. I'm very, like, I can tell you it's very difficult for me, but that's the only way that we're going to be able to live amicably together. Because we just, not only that, we have tons of cultures in this country as well. So we have tons of viewpoints. Like, there's enough
Absolutely.
disagreements between white people like me, let alone everybody coming from all these different countries with different backgrounds. I mean, we
Sure.
just have so many different cultures. So, and I'll give a good example of one that comes up regularly that people may not even agree with me on this, but I feel very strongly. So there's there's a lot of religious people in this country, right? And
Hmm.
the founding fathers were also smart enough to separate religion and state. They, like, hey, you can look and honor whatever God you want, but that's, ideally not going to dictate government policy. Right? Again, this is in the 1700s. Like, these guys, like, it's crazy they knew this stuff.
Sure.
And I personally, again, libertarian. I've always been for, and most people our age are, whatever makes people happy, I'm for. I don't care what people do. But a lot of people, Christian religion, are, not huge fans of gay marriage, right?
Sure.
So
Right.
as long as they're following that religious view, like, or whatever, like, they're probably not going to be the biggest fan of it. So we can just keep yelling at those people. Or what the American thing to do would be to say, hey, your view I don't agree with at all. I believe I should be able to get married to who I want. You don't. Should we make it illegal as a country? Most Christians that I've talked to don't think that gay marriage should be illegal. So as long as it's not infringing rights on a state level, who, like, our view, or like affecting people's opportunity and stuff like that, people should be allowed to have whatever views they want. So as long as it's not, like, as long as these Christians, which there are some, which I don't agree with at all, you can have that belief. But I'm very glad it's on a federal level. Gay marriage was, okay, because I just thought it was still silly that we
Sure.
were even talking about that. And as recent as Obama, if you recall, this is how recent the gay marriage issue is. Obama was against gay marriage in the mid 2000s. I mean, that's crazy how much that has progressed in the last decade. But
Sure.
we have to be okay. Should people be able to have views? If a Christian wants to not agree with gay marriage because in their religion a man and a woman is the definition of a marriage, they should be 100% allowed to have that view.
Mhm.
Should we make gay marriage illegal? Absolutely not. People can do whatever they
Yep.
want because in their religion or non-religion, maybe gay
Mm.
marriage is the preference. Like, we can't tell people what to do, but I can still have my belief. And
Right.
I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense, but that's a big evolution opportunity for our country, is saying, hey, your view I don't agree with at all.
Mm.
And even with that, I bet the furthest right Christian or right wing person in this country and the furthest left, like, they probably do have a lot of common ground. If they actually somehow could just sit together and talk about things, they probably would agree
Sure.
on a lot. But what are your thoughts on that?
So again, this is a valid point, of course, for 100%. And now just zooming out a little bit and discussing this in conjunction with everything which we have been discussing, right? Now, look at it this way, right? Now, we are like everything which we're talking about is kind of centered around the philosophy of how people with opposing viewpoints are finding it more and more difficult to reach a common ground. Now, that said, obviously this was the case, let's say, with gay marriage, with everything else.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things which you were mentioning was that, hey, if we are trying to run a business, we should focus on clients, or should we focus on, like, on any of these issues which kind of, like, which can deter us from gaining new clients now whatsoever. Now, I might deviate from the topic, but I mean, it's kind of a little bit related. But see, now, one of the things which we were saying was also, like, LeBron should consider meeting the precedent and, like, resolving these differences. But now, how do you think his fans will take to that, right? Because at the end of the day, he's an entertainer, he's a celebrity, he's a professional
That's
as
true
well.
bravery, though. Like, if he truly wants to make change, you're going to create some enemies. There could be people like,
Absolutely.
fuck you, LeBron, you betrayed me. I'm never going to watch one of your games again. But would that make more change than just boycotting without a clear goal? I believe so.
100%, 100%. And see, that's the kind of um, that bravery and that whole fostering of this behavior needs to start from our side, right? Because I mean, and like, I'll tell you why. Because we need to kind of start focusing on all of these things, and especially resolving, like, disagreements, or agreeing that there are people whose viewpoints are different than mine, and it doesn't make them wrong or it makes me right whatsoever. And if that's the society which we can form, like, and by we, I'm referring to literally everyone around us, if we can form, especially our generation, if we can form that society, people like LeBron would probably not think twice before taking, like, a step like this. Because I mean, at the end of the day, he's a business, he's a brand. He has to keep in mind his fans, his sponsors, his PR agency, his like, essentially everyone around him. So for him to take that kind of a risk, if he weighs the pros and cons and goes like, okay, you know what, it's going to backfire big time on me, and as much as I want to do this, I'm not sure this is the right move given the circumstances whatsoever. I'll just refrain from it. And that's the kind of behavior which we are fostering, right? Because I mean, every time someone stands up for something, people who don't agree with them kind of go start bullying the person, right? And I mean, if together we can reform the society and we can be like, and that's why I'm glad that you actually started this podcast, because I mean, this is exactly what like the first step towards like, building that society should be. That, hey, if we can agree with different viewpoints on the same thing, why can't we like, adopt the same pattern or adopt the same principle towards celebrities and brands like LeBron? And if he stands up for something, I'm not going to go. If he stands up for something which is contrary to what I believe in, I'm not going to go unfollow him, or I'm not going to hate on him. I'll just be like, hey, that's his viewpoint. You know what? He has his right. I have my own. Maybe I don't agree with him on what he's doing. Maybe I do agree with him on what he's doing. End of the day, we are two different people, and that's fine. So
Yeah.
if we can build that culture which fosters this behavior, I think we'll start seeing some definite progress. So be it NBA, be it on our side or on any level. So yeah.
Yeah, even if like, because I think it may be unrealistic to just be like, hey, that's his viewpoint, that is what it is. Like, even if it makes you fucking furious, even if you're just like, I can't believe LeBron would do that, I can't believe Trump would do that, then you could say, this really makes me mad. Also, he's equal rights as American as me, and I just have to remember that. Right. I would love to be curious and why he feels this way. I would love to have a conversation with somebody maybe experiencing the same thing. If you can't, talk to Donald Trump or LeBron, which most of us can't, I'd like to talk to somebody maybe in a similar situation that I could learn from. It's just like shifting a mindset. It's just like F you, F you, F you. It's like, hey, everybody deep down believes that their beliefs are superior, right? My political beliefs, if everybody just thought like me, the world would be a better place. I mean, I just feel everybody deep down believes that. So if we just had these conversations, and we're allowed to get mad if like Trump does dumb, I'm not a big Trump guy. Like I did not vote for him in 2016. We will see. Trump does a lot of stuff and tweets a lot of things and says a lot of things to people that like frustrate me. But there's a difference, I think, in saying that was stupid, that's hurtful to me, that's upsetting to me, but also like I wonder why he thinks that way. Like is Trump in that much pain? Is Trump like that unhappy in his life where he has to act like this? Does Trump really need this much attention to where he needs to do this? Like, did he not get love as a child? Like, I want to talk to Trump and see why he's thinking that way, rather than just like, F Trump, we're going to destroy this country. Like it's just, just a difference in mindset. And that's okay, I think. Like, and
100%, yeah.
It's either okay or we have no chance long term as a country, because every civilization has eventually collapsed historically, right? I mean, so for us to continue, like I said, there's no way the First Amendment's going anywhere. There's a reason. Isn't that crazy? Not only were they the founding fathers visionary, they didn't make this the Fifth Amendment, the Seventh Amendment. They're like, this is the motherfucking first. And second was guns. They're like, you need to be able to say what you want and protect your house from government overrunning you. It's just like that was number one and number two. It's so crazy. And it's like, how in 2020, how relevant is that, the fact that was number one? Isn't that crazy?
Absolutely. And I'm sure, like, when they were coming up with all of these, like, provisions and the Constitution, they received a lot of, like, contrary opinions as well. And then somehow they resolved it to reach what we see today. And now we see how relevant that is. So that kind of, like, proves your point as to, like, for example, how having, like, conflicting opinions back then, even then, agreeing on something led to something which is as relevant today as it was back then. So why can't we just, like, continue passing that baton on and just, like, going from there?
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to talk to you about something too. We're going to take a bit of a shift, but I think some really good insight you could share as well is you obviously dealt with all the immigration policies
Sure.
and procedures to get here. And I'll just throw a little disclaimer. I remember in the Democratic primaries when it was early, there was all these people, Bernie, Warren, Biden, obviously, Pete, Amy, Tulsi, and like I feel like minus Tulsi, they were all just like, we want completely open borders. And I'm just like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Like, defund the police may be number one dumb. Number two could be we just want complete open borders. And it's like, that is like not progressive. That's just really crazy that any serious Democratic or Republican politician could talk about complete open borders with a straight face. I mean, that's absolutely insane to me. And how Trump's actually called racist because he's strong on immigration policy, which, again,
Right.
I think what makes America great is the fact that we're a bunch of immigrants. But obviously there has to be limitations, there has to be controls. And and we're gonna dive into your experience with that. But
Sure.
you're the perfect example of if you could make a perfect avatar for an immigrant to come here, it would be you. It would be you come over here, you run companies, you create jobs, you create opportunities, you purchase the house. I mean, you're putting money into this. You're paying
Sure.
taxes. You're doing all these things that I think are fantastic, and I love immigration. But obviously, there just has to be rules and restrictions about that. So I just wanted to just share that as well because
Thank
I
you.
was
Appreciate it. Yeah.
I my mind was blown first off on watching that Democratic primary where they're all like, "We want open borders," and then secondly, I just wanted to obviously share some compliments towards you. But can you share a little bit about what it was like to go from being in South Africa to then somehow getting through that whole process and then being in another country, being in America?
Okay. So I think it was, to be honest with you, it was very straightforward. Um, it wasn't, and again, it could just be me. Maybe I was a little fortunate, but I think my colleagues who I saw follow the same process as me also came right with it, and they also got the same opportunity. I think it was very straightforward in terms of what the process was, their requirements. Um, I mean, essentially, okay. Well, I understand where the US is coming from, of course. If I mean, it's the most desired move-in country, most desirable country to move in the world. I mean, everybody from the world wants to come here. So opening borders, I'm not sure, like, what if that's the way to go about it, or I'm not sure if that's the way it should be, essentially. I mean, because if you're letting everyone in without any like security check, without any background checks whatsoever, no country I know where, or at least no country where I've had the chance to live in, has done that. No, and so I fail to understand why would the US want to do that. I mean, or if in this case, why would the US be a country which should do that? I mean, it's because the other countries don't see half as many immigrants as what the US does, and of course, like, there are different sections, there are different visas, there are different provisions, different like, articles, different kind of like, categories in which you can apply for. I feel like by far, the number of categories and the options which you have of arriving in the country in the US are, you can basically choose which route you want to take. Whether you want to start a business, whether if you are an exceptionally talented individual with extraordinary abilities who has started companies and successfully run them in multiple different countries, there's a visa exclusively designed for you to do that, which I know a few people who applied for them and then eventually came right with that. If you are an employee of a company which has multiple branches overseas, and if you just want to move an employee on a manager role from any of the other branches over to the US, that's a whole different visa which you can apply for. If you're just interested in coming here and then like work here for any of the local like state nationwide companies, there's a program for that as well. And again, I never felt it was they were asking me to jump through hoops or there were lots of red tapes or whatsoever. Obviously, when you arrive at the airport, at any airport in the US for the first time, and the Customs and Immigration officer looks at your passport, they are going to ask you questions which to some people might come across as threatening. Some people might be intimidated by that.
Do you remember what those questions were?
And again, yeah, absolutely. So it was my first time, and as luck would have it, my port of entry in the US was New York at JFK, which was probably now in hindsight one of the most crowded airports in which I've ever been to. And then of course I arrived there during prime time, and huge queues, huge lines of people. I reach, and the questions were they were like, okay, how long do you plan to be here? What's your purpose of visit? He could verify what he was doing was verifying all my answers against the information which he had in the system, just to kind of make sure that my story matches what's over there. And again, if you don't really have anything which you're lying about, which you're hiding, it'll all be super quick. So literally, I think less than 3 minutes of me answering the questions, and he stamped my visa, says welcome to the US, and I was in. It wasn't intimidating. It wasn't daunting. Okay, now a disclaimer here would be, of course, he could see my passport, he could see my travel history, he could see the number of countries which I have lived and visited to. Kind of adds a little bit to your credibility. And this also helped me when I was applying for the US visa for the first time at the embassy in Johannesburg, because there as well, you get asked quite a few questions and you get to know immediately whether they are approving or denying your visa. So again, when I was applying for the visa, the questions were pretty much the same which I was asked when I was arriving here, again, to match the two stories. And I feel like if I had all the paperwork with me, I had the documents which they had asked for, I had more than the required documents to prove the validity and the credibility of my answers. And after literally 5 minutes of the interview at the embassy in Johannesburg, they were like, okay, sweet, we will approve your visa. You will have it over the next 7 days, and then you are good to fly. I did not feel that I was being asked for anything unreasonable. All the documents which were asked for were super straightforward, very simple. And again, the whole process, collecting those documents and the admin involved, that can be a little bit overwhelming. Once you have that in a row, once you have your ducks in a row, you're essentially good to go. I mean, it's not as daunting as it seems. It's not as as bad as it seems. Once you arrive here, there's a process for you to convert the visa to a green card, which is what I followed. And this I'll have to mention. Obviously, when you are here, it's a little bit difficult to do all that process by yourself. So you would want to seek help of certain good immigration attorneys, which could obviously be expensive depending on their calibers and their qualifications. But again, the immigration attorneys which I used were very helpful. They were super prompt. They were very transparent in sharing what are my chances of getting the visa and whatsoever. When you decide to go through it, I mean, they made sure that I had all the paperwork. They made sure everything was checking. They filed all the petitions on my behalf, and then the green card was approved as well. So I feel like it was a very straightforward process, not really something which was out of the ordinary for me. In fact, as a matter of fact, there have been countries which have had a way more strict and a way more admin intensive paperwork in terms of immigrations, which I've had to face. And I know a few of my friends from other countries, when they were trying to visit South Africa, even for a short-term work visa, it took them way longer to kind of come right with their visas for South Africa, as opposed to what it took me to get to the US.
Yeah.
So I feel like, every country you visit will have its own different requirements of the immigration. Again, translates back to the point which we were discussing. Because it's the US and everything about here is covered internationally, they make it seem like as if it's extremely difficult to get in here. Again, if you have your paperwork in order, if you're not lying to the authorities, if you can back every fact in your application up with relevant records and paperwork, it's probably one of the easiest processes which I've had to go through.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So how long did the whole process take you, and including paying lawyers here, how much do you think you've spent on the whole process?
Okay. So the first visa was obviously a transfer from my South African entity to the US entity, which took me 4 weeks to get approved. And that actually now I applied for express entry, which was 2 weeks. So 2 weeks to get approved, and another 2 weeks to get the visa stamped on my passport. So a total of 4 weeks. Converting that into a green card is a lengthy process. So it takes about 6 months for you to get approved, and then another 1 year for you to actually physically receive it and everything else. So that's a bit of a different ball game. As far as the fees for the lawyers go, for my first application, which was just the visa, I kind of submitted everything myself, so that was super straightforward. Didn't really have to pay anyone for that. But converting that to a green card, I used the lawyers. And I'd say, so the lawyers which I used were not obviously extremely expensive, but they weren't like extremely naive either. They were like, they have decent work experience and whatsoever. I'd say overall it costed about $10,000 to convert the visa to a green card. Again, you could go for cheaper ones, you could go for more expensive ones, but these guys got the job done perfectly, exactly how I expected them to. So I couldn't have asked for anything more. And come to think of it, the way I think everyone sees it is that this amount is an investment. It's an investment towards a better quality of life, a better work-life balance, overall, entering into the US, where, like we were discussing, the opportunities are tenfold compared to the countries, at least where I come from. So yeah.
What? No, that's interesting. So just to be clear too, the process you mentioned that takes a year, you've been able to do a lot of that process while you've been in the United States. Like you're able to just get the temp to get in. So how long did it take you? Like you're able to get in rather quickly, and then now it's the process and the investment is getting the actual green card. Like you just get in the country. So how long did that take initially just to enter into the country?
Like I said, so that was 4 weeks overall.
Okay, 4 weeks.
And then 4 weeks to get done with it. And then, of course, I booked my flight another couple of months later. So just to kind of wrap my life up in South Africa. So I'd say, but otherwise, yeah. So from the immigration and admin standpoint, it was 4 weeks. And then once you are here, then it's a different procedure for you to convert that to your green card and then go from there.
Got it. Yeah, and I mean, that's interesting that it actually takes longer to get into some countries and deal with that process. I mean, it makes sense why America would try to make it do due diligence, but also make it simple, because you're just one example of someone that's investing here, buying a house, you're creating jobs, you're bringing in tax revenue. I mean, why wouldn't the U.S. want that here? Why wouldn't? And I think 100% of Americans can agree. If done with due diligence, we love immigration. I think it's fantastic. I think
absolutely,
it's one of the greatest things here. What do you think?
To give you one small example of how difficult it is. So, for example, compared to the US and South Africa, friends of mine who moved there for work, when you apply for a US work visa, they don't ask, they just kind of have you sign under the penalty of perjury that, hey, I have not been acquitted of any, I have not been guilty of any crimes, I have not been in any criminal offenses anywhere in the world whatsoever. And you just click yes. And then when you submit your application, they have the resources to do their own due diligence in matter of days. and get back to you whether your application is approved or denied based on what their research has concluded, and they can find out that information about you. I mean, I'm pretty sure that, hey, whether all my answers were correct or not. Now, come to think of it, when you apply for your South African visa, they don't let you, they don't have the resources to kind of do this research on your behalf. So what they ask you is that they ask you while submitting your application is that every country where you've lived for over a year since the age of 18, since you turned 18, you have to get a police clearance certificate from each of those countries and then submit it along with your visa application. Now, a police clearance certificate can take forever for you to receive them, depending on the countries which you've lived in. I mean, and again, I was recently applying for a Schengen work visa because I had a company in Europe, which I was working for, and they asked me the same thing. They asked me to submit a federal police clearance certificate from the US, and I was able to get that certificate from here in less than a week, right? Because that's how efficient the process is. If you were to apply for a PCC, like a police clearance certificate in South Africa, you're looking at least a month. And I had to obviously help my friends out with all of this, and they've lived in multiple countries. So every single country took at least 1 to 2 months for them to process the police clearance certificate. So their whole application could only be submitted for a South African work visa in about 3 to 4 months' time. And then the embassy takes about 3 months to process the visas. So it's way longer to enter there as opposed to what it is over here, as surprising as it may sound. But yeah.
Yeah. Now that is interesting. I mean, that's good to know. I mean, talking to you, obviously I just hear random immigration stuff on news and articles, but I feel like you've informed me quite a bit, because we had some of this conversation before when we first met, but I thought it would be a good convo to have,
Right.
where other people can listen. So, what are your thoughts, just based on your experience living in another country, coming over here and doing the whole immigration process? What are your thoughts on current immigration policies and the politics that go along with it? In particular, I know the Democrats hate the wall, that Trump's building. They absolutely despise it. His base absolutely loves it. So,
Right.
what are your thoughts on existing U.S. immigration policies?
So I think obviously, certain things, much like how you were saying, right? I mean, certain things you tend to agree with and certain ones you don't. So there are certain things which I strongly agree with when it comes to the U.S. immigration, and those being the due diligence, the fact that they do have their certain guardrails around how many times you can apply, what visas you can apply for, and the procedures and the processes and everything around that. Now, things which I'm not necessarily a big fan of are for example, the visa bans which were issued until the end of the year, and I know a lot of Silicon Valley companies kind of opposed them as well, because they were we understand, we get the sentiment of trying to preserve the US jobs and everything, but the roles and positions which we are kind of hiring for, they are not necessarily roles which we want, or I mean which can be filled by, say, the US employees, because we would these are contract workers which we kind of have from overseas come in, like Amazon, Google, and all of them. A lot of their workers come from, some of their developers and engineers come from Southeast Asian countries, and they were opposed to that, and which I think, of course, is right somewhere, because I mean which I think they were right in opposing it to an extent, because I mean I feel despite whatever has been going on in terms of COVID and everything else, I feel banning visas kind of and asking the companies to not hire any workers from overseas kind of goes against their freedom of who they want to hire. And I feel like that was a violation, and that's why, like, they were very strongly opposing it. Um, End of the day, if those companies are, for example, I'm not saying Amazon or Google, but like, let's say, for example, a small Silicon Valley startup is undergoing a tough time, and the only way for them to survive this tough time is by having employees come in from like other countries, which they can like afford to pay, like, in whatever salary, as opposed to like, having pay the US employees. This eventually helps them get back up on their feet to the point where they are able to hire more local talent, as opposed to like, constantly having an influx of people coming in from overseas, because that, end of the day, does cost way more in terms of the visa. Like I was saying, if you're looking at spending 10 to 12 grand for a visa through lawyers, I mean, these companies usually hire law firms and everything else. So that ends up costing way more as opposed to hiring local talent long term, because then the visas need to be renewed. There are constant like, checks. There are constant like protocols which they need to follow and everything. And then obviously, like, when you move an employee, you have to pay them like, an amount to kind of like a relocation fee, adjust their salaries as per the US standards, and multiple other things. So I feel like that whole process takes a lot of money. So they are not trying to save money by doing so. They're just trying to basically make ends meet until they can get back up on their feet.
Yeah.
So that was something which I don't necessarily agree with. But again, so it's not like generally, it like just my general opinion that it's perfect or it's flawed. I think it's a mix of both. But that's what I think, much like any other system is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I personally don't know enough about that to give an extremely educated opinion on it, but what the logic was, and again, not saying I necessarily support it or am opposed to it. Like, I don't know enough about it, but I know what the logic was, which is, hey, we have 40 million unemployed people here. Let's take care of our people first. And I guess both parties are guilty of being nationalist for whatever policies are important to them, and I think that was just a nationalist move. It was, hey, like, we're gonna do everything we can to take care of American citizens first. And to your point, it could actually backfire and hurt American citizens, because companies could be hurt because of it. Like, maybe they rely on that foreign labor, and because of that, their other branch of their division is hurting, and like, they have to lay off American people because of it. Again, it could end up being a really good move. It could have backfired in ways. I don't know enough, but yeah, I would say for the most part, my libertarian viewpoint is, again, let people kind of do whatever they want as long as they're not hurting other people, and let companies hire whoever they want. And so I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, I think overall, but I mean, other than that, as far as like the immigration policy and the procedure is concerned, I don't think that's anything different or anything like way more strict in any of the terms. Obviously, like we were discussing, because of the volume of immigrants which want to move to the US, the volume of people which want to come here for better lives, they'll have to put certain guardrails which may seem a bit obnoxious to the rest of the world, or if you are unfamiliar with how it works overseas, it may come across as like, hey, like, is it really necessary? But I mean, end of the day, you can't compare other countries to the US.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that, right? I mean, because if they saw the same volume of people trying to move there as what the US does, eventually they'll probably put the same guardrails. So, yeah.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I know a big topic we discuss in this country a lot too is what to do with existing illegal immigrants. And if I was in charge, what I would do, and I'm curious if you agree, I would make the borders, and they already are under Trump. I know, he's done a lot to strengthen border control. Also, a lot of people don't come here, obviously, crossing the border on ground. They come here on some sort of vacation or visa, and then they just stay. So,
Right.
but I would go really strict from today moving forward and come up with some sort of plan to make current illegal immigrants residents or citizens, to give them some sort of path. And again, as long as if they're law abiding, right? So if they're not law abiding, I don't think I personally don't have too much empathy. But if
Sure.
they're here, create some sort of path to have them pay taxes, have them be residents or citizens or whatever it is, and then moving
Right.
forward, just be super strict and have our immigrants go through the kind of the procedure that you went for or went through to get here rather. Do you
Right.
agree with that?
Yes, definitely, because I feel like what you said is fair to everyone. Um, I mean, you can't really. It's a bit tough because I mean, you can't really take a case by case approach because the law has to be the same for all. So it can't be like, okay, for example, let's say Mr. X, he came to the US illegally from wherever, uh, built a life here, has been paying taxes, has not been accused of any charges whatsoever, and like is a responsible citizen of the society. So the laws should be different for them as opposed to someone who also entered the US illegally, but then, treaded down the wrong path or whatsoever, or like, caused a nuisance to the society in whatsoever regard. I mean, obviously you can treat the two cases different to a certain degree, but end of the day, when you're coming up with a law to kind of formulate, like it has to be a blanket law for everyone. And I believe, yes, I mean, so what you're saying does make sense. I mean, like give both of them the option of, based on whatever records, like to kind of make it um, legal, sort of like, to kind of give both of them a way forward that, hey, if these boxes are checked in the coming weeks, months, years, whatever, happy to have you here. Otherwise, unfortunately. So this kind of also gives them a bit of leeway to decide whether they can reform themselves and adjust to what the society here demands, or find themselves a spot back home, or whatsoever the case might be. Although, as ghastly that may sound initially, but I mean, end of the day, when you are coming up with a law, it has to be a blanket law, and if it's giving them the time to decide that, I think it's fair. Yep.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think that's a pretty widely accepted viewpoint. I feel even even moderate Republicans, moderate conservatives don't agree with shipping out 10 plus million illegal immigrants.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't. Again, law abiding illegal immigrants that are just vital parts to the community and stuff. And we have to be honest too. A lot of illegal immigrants will do a lot of jobs that Americans don't want to do.
Right.
And also, like, I've joked about it with friends before. A lot of girls I've dated have been Hispanic. I, typically prefer Hispanic girls over white girls oftentimes. But I mean, the work ethics I see in some of these families is just unreal, and they'll just gladly
Yeah.
do 40 or 50 hours of work of like manual labor. And I'm just like, if they had my business brain with their work ethic, I mean, I'd create the next Amazon. I mean, it's
Yeah.
insane. Like, but curious too, what do people like? What are your friends, and what is South African society like overall view of Donald Trump?
Again, it's very mixed, and it's mixed because of the fact of how the media represents it. So I feel like it's mixed because of what it's not mixed because of the opinion which they've formed, unless of course they've lived in the US under Trump administration. And also, I feel like, okay, well, even if, let's say, for example, myself, right? I mean, I arrived here about 3 years ago, so I don't really have the experience of living in any other administration to compare it to. So I don't know how it's changed. So I feel like that's the same sentiment which the South African population has, or most of my friends have, depending on what's the source of information, where they are getting it from. I mean, if they are following a channel or like a news source which kind of supports him, then they'll have a different understanding of him as opposed to if they are following a news channel which is completely against him. Um, in general, there's more curiosity as to why. Like how you were saying, like if you had a chance of meeting him, you'd ask him why does he say these things or whatever. So I feel like that's the same viewpoint which they have. And again, like most of my friends who are logical enough to kind of like understand different viewpoints, when they ask me on it, and I tell them as to how like how things are over here. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't really have a US political viewpoint at all because I mean I haven't really lived here, and like I was saying, I don't really have any other administration to compare it to, so I don't know what to support. I mean, or essentially, I mean, if there's something which feels wrong, like how we were discussing, like the visa ban did feel wrong, I'll tell you about it. But and if something doesn't feel wrong, it's probably like I won't really necessarily make a big deal out of it. So that's the same philosophy which they see. And so they were asking me when the whole visa bans took place, because some of them were contemplating moving here and they were already in the process. And they were like, do you think it's even like, it's even worthy for us to like, it doesn't even make sense for us to pursue this application? Or should we just look at alternative options like UK or Canada or Australia? And I was like, why did you choose the US as the first destination compared to all those countries in the first place? And obviously, like, their reasons were the ability to basically form a business out of anything. And I mean, obviously, because of South Africa, most of them were charmed with Elon Musk. So they were like, okay,
Yeah, that's
and
true.
or whatsoever the case might be. And I was like, so those reasons have got nothing to do with the political scenario which exists here. So now why are you letting the political scenario change your decision? Like, come to think of it, once you arrive here, those reasons which you thought initially will be still as valid as they were when you made that decision. So why not pursue them nonetheless? And they were like, yeah, actually, you know what? I mean, we were just like so kind of confused because of how the media has been presenting everything. But I mean, eventually, when they reach a logical conclusion, they will follow through. But I mean, then there are certain ones who are like, no, actually, you know what? We just much rather look at anywhere else. So let's see.
Yeah. You brought up a good point actually that I've voiced to a few friends recently, and I want to start voicing this more. Personally, like whoever's president, our country was designed this way. Whoever is president, like by design, isn't really going to have that much impact on what's going on. I mean, maybe if Biden gets elected, federal tax rates could go up a little bit. So, like, I'm not, I wouldn't really be looking forward to that. But,
Mm,
there's not much a president really does that's going to affect our lives. I mean, really, what it comes
right.
down to, like, I don't think I think a lot more gets done on a local level because that's where, like, hey, like taxes, property taxes are going to go up in my community so we can fund the school, and that's where my kids go, and that's where, like, there's like direct, I think, results from, or I can donate money to this school, and that's again where my kids go, or just again whatever.
So,
I think whoever's president really doesn't affect us that much, and people that are blaming Trump for all the violence and stuff. I mean, there were riots in Ferguson and stuff under Obama, and that's when we had a black president. So I think that there's just going to be challenges we go through as a society. Of course, Trump could do a much better job of uniting people and talking with the black community specifically. I actually think he's losing out on a giant political opportunity personally to
so
connect with the black community. But
right.
yeah, I think regardless of if Biden was in office right now, I think almost the same shit would be going on. I mean, you can't convince me that uh, the George Floyd thing happened, but if Biden was in office, there wouldn't have been the same
Sure.
reaction. So I don't
Right.
think it's that much different personally. Maybe what I think Trump has done a good job, and I'm not an economist, but I will say part of our economy is consumer spending, as you know. Another big part of it is investing, and I think Trump does give old money confidence in investing. I will say that. There's if you're a 70-year-old man and you have millions in cash, and it's like, hey, keep this cash or put it in the economy, and invest in this startup, invest in this real estate, whatever it is. I do feel and believe that Trump does give that old money more investment confidence.
Right.
And again, there are little things presidents can do, but ultimately for your friends, no matter who's our president, they can come here and have a great opportunity. And on that topic, do you believe that every American has equal opportunity to be successful?
Like, are you asking every American, like, regardless of their socioeconomic background
Yeah.
or their?
So I know some people, obviously some people start at first base, some people start at second base. Of
Sure.
course, if you grow up
Right.
wealthy, it may be easier.
Absolutely.
But do you believe just like not outcome? I know everybody's kind of at a different place, but if they work and put their mind to it, and maybe some people start ahead of others, which there's no way to ever not have that. Do you
Sure.
believe that with the right mindset and work ethic, Americans can achieve just about anything they want?
100%. And I don't just believe that that's true for um, Americans. I feel like anyone who who comes to the country, obviously, like, has an equal opportunity of, like, of kind of achieving this. I mean, and again, there might be people who'll say, no, it's not true, because then they'll quote examples. But I've had a chance to see a lot of first-hand examples of people who have either moved to the country or have been born and raised in the country and have just built themselves from absolute scratch with absolutely zero resources. And now they are where they are. And I mean, like, and a huge credit for that goes to, I mean, two things, right? I mean, like, number one is, of course, their effort and, like, their work ethic and their overall, like, drive. And the second thing is, obviously, like, there has to be a bit of luck involved. And I mean, you could be working really hard and smart and whatsoever, but I mean, if the luck is not on your side, then of course, like, there's that. So I don't feel like, but other than these two things, obviously some people tend to get more lucky than the rest. But at the same time, it's got nothing to do with anything else outside of it, right? I mean, like, it's not got anything to do with the fact that, hey, I don't have the same opportunity as him because of X, Y, and Z reasons. No,
Have you ever met a lazy, lucky person, Mayank?
I have, yeah,
Have you?
I have,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, so
But
maybe they
but
do
at the
exist,
same,
but I feel like if you put yourself, yes, people do get lucky. Some people do reach opportunities earlier than others. If you keep putting yourself in the right place, eventually somebody is going to, like, I started my first company when I was 22. When I was 20 or 21, I met the guy that ended up investing in my company, waiting tables. I took my job really seriously. I would always be super professional. I would talk to him about business, and one day eventually he's just like, hey, I have these so I was like his assistant. I just did bitch work. He paid me like minimum wage, and eventually I worked my way, like, you could say that's luck. Maybe it is partial luck. You could also say, hey, even though it was a serving job for me, which I knew wasn't
no,
going to be my career, but I made the most of it. You never know who's sitting down at the table. It just happened
right,
to be an entrepreneur that appreciated my hard work, just serving him food and drinks, right? So, I think there is a component of luck for sure, but if you put yourself and just have the right mindset, have the right attitude, and keep putting yourself in the right places to succeed, eventually you're gonna, like, get those good chances. You're gonna get those big breaks. I mean, that's what I believe.
100%. And just to clarify, I have met lazy, lucky individuals, but you know how they say, and I've actually only met once, and I'm not sure if this is the general rule or whatsoever, but I mean, like, how the saying goes that it's easy to make a million, it's difficult to keep it,
Yeah.
or it's easy to make one, but then making it from 1 to 10 requires, like, some kind of skill or something. Um, so I've met people who've been lucky, who've kind of just hit a jackpot or something, but then there's this one individual who I'm talking about. He failed to keep it. He failed
Yeah.
to sustain it, or he failed to grow it. And that's why, like, I mean, you can get lucky once, you can't get lucky twice, right? I mean, or I mean, well, I mean, because keeping that money or growing that wealth, um, does require some or the other form of skill or knowledge, which you can obtain by working. If you haven't worked a day in your life, you don't know like how to grow that. So,
Yeah.
but, yeah,
For sure, yeah, I know luck's a part of it, and I don't want to ever say like, I mean, we're lucky to be in this country. I'll say that. I mean,
yeah,
I'm grateful and lucky to be here, but there's no way I think like I just like this is where it's important to realize some people are just going to be more fortunate than others, and there's no way to ever make that not the case. But fortunately, we are in a country where with a good work ethic and a right mindset, I don't want to be out here and say if you work hard, you can be wealthy and like be worth $100 million. I don't think that's the
mm,
case. I think it takes maybe a little bit more luck and dedication to skill and networking and stuff like that to be super wealthy. But if
sure,
you work hard enough here, you can earn a middle income wage and provide a good life for you and your family. I think that's almost a guarantee. Uh,
absolutely. And there's like, I mean, I think again, talking of which, I've seen firsthand examples of that. Um, I have friends who have moved here from Eastern European countries, and they have always had that strong work ethic instilled in them from their childhoods. Um, they move here, they work 20 hours a day, they work 18 hours a day, they work crazy long hours, they work the weekends. They do all of that with a smile on their faces. They're always like happy to be working here. And sometimes, like, very often we get into conversations as to what keeps them this driven and what drives them. And they're like, we can work the exact same amount of time back in our home countries and not make a quarter of money which we are making over here. So why not use this opportunity to make as much wealth, to generate as much wealth as we can, so we could provide our families back home with a much better lives, with a much better life, or I mean, with much better like resources, and eventually have them move here. I know a friend of mine who moved here from an Eastern European country, and he's literally been working almost like like literally 12 to 15 hours a day, every single day of the week, including the weekends. All of this so he could afford to save enough money to pay for the lawyer's fees so he can get his wife and kids from his country over here. And he was like, can you imagine how difficult this would have been and how long it would have taken if I were doing the exact same thing in my home country? But probably a far-fetched dream. But over here, I can achieve that in less than 6 months.
yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah, the I texted you like a week or two ago, and I was like, "Hey, my massage therapist is trying
right.
to get her daughter here," and I mean, if this isn't the American dream, I don't know what is. She's Venezuelan born. She works really hard. She's honestly one of the better massage therapists I have. That's why she's like the one I use now. She's just like I'm a regular of hers, and she like $100 a massage. I think I mentioned
So,
this to LaShawn too. A few massages a day. Like, is she getting rich
mm,
off massages? Absolutely not. Is she making
right,
probably $70,000 to $100,000 a year giving massages? Yeah, and I
mm,
mean that's a great income, and now she's in the financial point to hopefully help her rest of her family get here, and that's I mean it just shows
yep,
the hard work, and again, is it something she can
absolutely,
do for the rest of her life? I don't know. That seems pretty grueling on the body, but just having that opportunity
right,
in the first place, I think is
yep,
great. And she doesn't. Not only that, not only could she earn good income, like it's not. And I don't know her education background. We have good conversations and stuff. She seems very smart, but like it's not like you necessarily need to have a master's degree or anything to do it. I mean, she can earn a very good livable wage of I'm just assuming it's in the 70 to 100 range, and that's just being good at
yep,
one thing and working hard. That's it.
sure,
Not
sure,
she's not an executive that's raising money for a business and building a big company. She's good at
mm,
one thing. She shows up when she says, she does a good job, and she's making a good wage for herself and now is trying
absolutely,
to support her family. So what
100%.
one final thing, just I know you recently launched a new venture.
Mhm.
Can you share a little bit about your new company? I know it's you're doing some pretty cool things.
Sure. So we launched this company called Markley. It's again, it's in the health and beauty industry. It's about we are trying to empower small health and beauty business owners in launching their own product line. Uh, Help them. So essentially, whenever a small health and beauty business is trying to launch their own product line, there's a lot of legwork involved in terms of the research, finding the right suppliers, finding the right product, ordering samples, testing if the samples suit their needs, and then eventually going from there and then placing their final orders and getting them delivered and constantly having to refill. And this is just on the ordering side. There's a whole different brand building side which is involved, which is like coming up with a product logo, design, labels, layouts, marketing them, creating a social media channel where they can sell them, an online store, an e-commerce store, and everything else. So we kind of figured that this is a gap in the industry. So we took all the legwork away from them. Still in its early stages, but we have seen some promising feedback. We've gotten some very promising feedback, some decent results in the first few months. So my business partner Kevin and I, we've been working diligently towards this. And again, this is something which probably would have never been like, a possibility or like, an idea which we are now seeing come to life had it not been for me having seen this firsthand in the US market, because I don't see this going as smooth in most of the other countries where I've had the chance to live as it's going here in the US, simply because of the suppliers and the overall hustle which the people here have shown. The suppliers we've been trying to work with, which we have been working with, have been very good to work with. They've been very promising. We've received some encouraging feedback from their side. The clients have been proactive in making decisions, and they have a vision with their brands and everything else. Yeah, I think that's what we are trying to do, and that's what we've been trying to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you have a really impressive background in the health and beauty space. Who's your ideal client? Just to be clear, I know it's small salon groups and things like that are looking to
Right.
purchase products and have white label and private label products.
Right. So it's essentially any small salon or an independent stylist, barber, makeup artist. We have been working with a variety of different lash techs as well. So essentially any small health and beauty business which is willing to grow their brand by introducing a product line to their business. And that's who we are trying to target. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Well, super grateful you were on
Likewise. No,
the
this
podcast
was very
today.
interesting.
Also grateful for your perspective, being born
Sure.
outside of the country, being raised in South Africa. Any final thoughts or anything you wanted to share before we end?
I think just everything which we've discussed now. So thank you so much for having me. I think everything which we've discussed has been very productive, and it's always. I think this is a brilliant initiative. I think when you first told me about the idea of this podcast, I was very thrilled and very much looking forward, and I've been watching all the episodes. So I think it's a very interesting step to kind of bring people with different backgrounds and different viewpoints and have them come together. And like how we have been discussing, I think this is the fundamental problem which we kind of need to address to progress towards not just a better, country, but I think a better world and a better society overall. So yeah, I'm very excited to be. Thank you again for having me here, and I think I'm very excited to looking forward to seeing how this pans out and how can this potentially make a dent in people's mentalities and mindsets. So, yeah.
Awesome, man. Thanks, Mayank.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Openly Outspoken with Jeremy Adams. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player so you get updated when new episodes are live. If you enjoyed this episode, the best way to support is to leave a 5-star review and share the podcast with people in your life that you feel would benefit from these types of discussions. Visit openlyoutspoken.com for additional details on the show. Find out how to connect with Jeremy on social media and learn more information about Jeremy's personal and business life. We'll see you next time.